So hi everyone, my name is Peter Cook. As I said, I'm head of the New York State Council of Churches and a principal with the Religious Nationalisms Project along with my colleague Neal Christie. And I want to begin by saying that religious nationalisms threaten democracy by distorting religion to serve authoritarian agendas. When governments misuse religion to justify discrimination and violence, both religious freedom and human dignity are at risk. So the Religious Nationalisms Project responds by fostering cross-faith dialogue, examining how religious nationalisms operate across traditions and regions, and we build relationships among communities impacted by rising authoritarianism, and we seek to equip them to defend democracy, human rights, and pluralism. And so you might ask, well, what is religious nationalism? And please remember that what we're talking about here is any government that seeks to adopt a religion, twist that religion, and weaponize it against religious minorities. Religious nationalism is also used as a tool to discriminate against people who are practitioners of the same faith adopted by the government. So, for example, when Bishop Buddy dressed down the President of the United States after his inauguration at the Washington Cathedral, she drew on her Christian principles to criticize the president's Christian nationalism. And in response, she was shunned and called a heretic. In the same way, when a Jewish person criticizes the Israeli government for not adhering to Jewish principles, they are called an anti-Semite or a self-loathing Jew. And when a Hindu criticizes the Hindu nationalist state, they too can be harassed, surveilled, and threatened and not considered a real Hindu. So religious nationalisms employ certain common tools to further their agenda. And when you see these tools operating or getting used in your community, in your state, in your nation, in the world, you are seeing strong evidence that religious nationalism is likely behind it. So I'm going to go through a number of these characteristics. One, state-sanctioned religion. Religious nationalists promote a version of one religion that supports government power and marginalizes those who believe differently. Usually the language can be found in zealously attacking, for instance, the separation of church and state, in favor of a Christian religion or an all-Jewish or an all-Hindu state, for example, or an all-Buddhist state, or an all-Muslim state. Secondly, God and government are one. Religious nationalists claim that they have divine support for their state policies, framing political agendas as sacred mandates. Historically speaking, the United States often talks about how back in the day they were on a mission from God to take land from and kill Native American people. We call that the doctrine of discovery, or the Israeli government is on a mission from God to take land and kill people to create an all-Jewish state divinely mandated by God. A distorted faith. Religious nationalism is a secular, ideological use of religion, often in direct conflict with the core values of faith traditions. In all of our faith traditions, we focus on a few core principles like each person is created in the image of God and must be treated equally, or that we are called every day to love the Lord our God with all our heart, mind, and soul. And we know that we are loving God appropriately when we turn to love our neighbor. And in our life together, we show particular concern for the poor, the dispossessed, the hungry, the immigrant, the incarcerated, the formerly incarcerated, people of color, women, people of different sexual orientations, and those who are enslaved or of a lower caste or class. So if you find yourself gritting your teeth when politicians are speaking of policies in the name of religion that defy the principles that I just mentioned, you are probably witnessing a government distorting your faith and others. Replacement theory. Immigrants and religious minorities are falsely portrayed as enemies who must be excluded, eliminated, or denied citizenship. So we see this in terms of purges of immigrants in the United States. In India, we see the blocking of immigrants and religious minorities by deporting them, sometimes putting them in labor camps or denying them citizenship status. And this can also be seen playing out certainly in these discriminatory policies we find in the Israeli state, or just coming back to the United States for a moment, we had, for instance, the Texas gerrymander, which was really designed to consolidate white power and to exclude those who are people of color or immigrants who are seen as a threat. Replacement theory. Erasure of history. Religious nationalists attack liberal education and they seek to censor diverse perspectives and defund institutions that challenge the government's romanticized historical narrative, which excludes marginalized and minority voices. So when you see anti-DEI initiatives, including the rewriting of history by deleting minority voices, or you see the federal government threatening to withhold funds from institutions who have classes which primary minority voices, or if you see the firing of faculty, the suspension of students, or the denial of admission of international students, this is all part of an agenda to erase history. Religious-based violence. Violence is used to divinely ordain violence, militarism, home and sacred site destruction, and land acquisition. We certainly see this exhibited by Israeli and Hindu nationalist governments who can be complicit in burning or bombing mosques and churches, and arrest and killing their leaders and taking their land. Scriptural abuse. Religious nationalists use ancient texts to justify present-day injustice. For example, weaponizing scripture to defend exclusive territorial claims or suppress other religious groups. They may say things like, the Bible said that Israel was entitled to the land without regard to justice for the stranger in their midst. They will say that scripture justified slavery. They will say that the Bible willed U.S. soil to Christians, and more specifically, white Christians. Two more. Religious nationalists use propaganda to further their ends. So many of us, I think, can say, Donald Trump is lying all the time. Netanyahu is lying all the time. Narendra Modi seems to be lying all the time. But you must understand that this is a propaganda strategy. You continually lie about the facts and you repeat the misinformation often enough until it becomes truth and reality. Red becomes green, blue is now yellow. You set up in the United States an anti-Christian task force, an anti-Christian bias task force to go after Christians. Or you use the language of the oppressed to oppress the oppressed. For example, you seek to defend religious freedom, by which you mean the freedom of Christians to discriminate against others. You say, as a Christian Zionist, that you want to build up Israel when in fact you are seeking the end times when you will the Jewish people's destruction. You set up an anti-Semitism task force and defend the Jewish people while severely attacking Jewish people on our campuses who criticize Israel. And if you are a Christian who happens to agree with those Jewish people, you are also now becoming an anti-Semite. And finally, Christian religious nationalists focus on patriarchy and control. Religious nationalists focus on a rigid gender hierarchy with women and non-traditional families seen as threats to God's order. So for Christian nationalists, Jesus is the head of the church, the man is the head of the household, the wife subjugates herself to the husband. They need to have children. Women who work or might choose to have an abortion or assert control over their bodies are frowned on. If you are gay and married, you are less than, you are deviant. If you're transgender, that is a problem. If you choose not to have children, that's also a problem. And for Christian nationalists, they seek to pass laws that reinforce that patriarchal view. So, thank you.
Hold on to it. Yeah, this is good. Hopefully people are taking notes and they're going to have some questions for Peter. And I'm going to share, I want to make one or two comments. I'm going to invite Pushka to come on up, okay? So building on what Peter has shared as some framework, recently I've come back, there's a philosopher, those of you who study philosophy, political philosophy, Hannah Arendt. That name may sound familiar to you. She was also a philosopher, she was a journalist, and she did a lot of work after World War II, sort of deconstructing what happened under National Socialism or the Nazi movement. Why is it that people allowed this to happen? Why is it millions of people, 6 million Jews, 6 million others, Slavs, people living with physically challenged, physically disabled, people who are living on the spectrum, Roma, were all slaughtered. Why the genocide? Why the genocide? And I want to just share very, very, very briefly with you what I keep coming back to when I think about, and again, I'm speaking from a context of my own Christian faith. Why is it so many of our churches are uncomfortable talking about religious nationalism? And why is it we may be a little uneasy going up to our Muslim or Jewish or Hindu or Sikh brother or sister and asking, does this impact you? If it does, how does it impact you? Rather than tell me, is this true or is this false? How does this impact you? Does it impact you? Is it a reality? So I just want to go through some of what I've picked up from Hannah Arendt's work. She said that the sad truth is that most evil is done by people who never make up their minds to do good or evil. They simply aren't making up their minds. It's not a conscious decision. And these are some indicators. Number one, thoughtlessness. Thoughtlessness, I didn't know. Should I have known? I didn't know. Not an absence of intelligence, but an unwillingness to reflect morally or to imagine the consequences of our actions. And I'm not just speaking about individuals, I'm talking about faith communities. A faith community saying, we just didn't know. Second, using cliches or official jargon to shield ourselves from self-examination. Peter alluded to this in the form of propaganda, using symbols, twisting, making into monsters symbols that really should be liberating and salvific for us from our religious traditions, now are really weaponized. They're used as a symbol of hate. Second thing, bureaucratic detachment, which is something that we've heard a little bit about. I think Peter referred to this. Mass atrocities often occur through paperwork, logistical administration. It's not always overt violence, it's covert violence. This distance from harm makes it the moral disengagement easier for people and for faith communities. Not only did we not know, but really it wasn't our fault. It's a part of a larger problem. We can't do very much. Third is conformity and obedience, conforming to a norm. And what happens if I don't conform? What is the cost for my not conforming? Yeah? What does it mean to be someone who stands outside from the herd, the crowd? People are more likely to participate in wrongdoing if it is normalized within their workplace, community, political system. I'm also going to say their faith community. Loss of personal responsibility. I was just following orders. Becomes a moral shield. In bureaucracies, responsibilities diffuse to no single person, so that they never feel fully accountable. It's never just one person's fault that the religious nationalist violence is happening. It's actually all of us. So that means I'm exempt. It's not really my fault. It's all our fault. So I'm not morally accountable. And this happens through, and Peter's alluded to this, authoritarian regimes, rising authoritarian regimes, civil service, police, soldiers who say they're enforcing the law, censorship, forced displacement, discriminatory policies, routine procedures, quote unquote, corporate and economic systems. And we see this, and I'm hoping Pushkar will allude to this in terms of what's happening in terms of Zionism and Hindutva in India, with the replacement of 20,000 workers in Palestinian workers right now by Indian workers that have been brought on in, or who are now serving in the military in Gaza. Environmental damage caused by industries where decision makers focus on profit margins, ignore human cost. Colonial and racial oppression. We can't deny that racial and ethnic oppression is at the heart of so many forms of religious nationalisms. Technology and bureaucratic system using data analysts, algorithm bias, surveillance, which we can hear a little, I'm sure Pushkar is going to bring up more. We can certainly bring it up in the context of Zionism. Engineers developing weapons without reflecting on their eventual use. So technology without a notion of what the end result will be. And everyday complicity. So with that, I want to say one word about patriotism and nationalism. Frequently in the Christian churches, for those of you who are not Christian, this is something that comes up. People say, well, I want to be patriotic, but I don't want to be nationalist. This may happen in all our faith communities, but I know it happens in our Christian communities because in worship communities and settings, I have heard sermons where my colleague pastors have preached sermons likening the cross to the U.S. flag, believe it or not. It happens today in 2025. And then unless they're challenged, they wonder, well, what's wrong with that, Pastor Avani? What's wrong with that? Until you have a conversation, well, the cross is not the same as the flag. Huh? The Bhagavad Gita is not the same as the Indian flag, is it? It should not be. I would argue the same thing in terms of Zionism. Zionism is not the same, it ought not to be the same as the Israeli flag. But this is just my musings, I'm just thinking of this. This is what I want to share with you about the distinction between patriotism and nationalism, and then I'll stop there. Patriotism does not require or minimize our religious convictions. So if you are a patriot, you have your religious convictions. It's not going to ask you to shift your religious convictions. Patriotism does not deny our religious affiliation or lack thereof. So a good patriot, I would argue, is someone who is not asked to give up their faith or to take on a particular faith. Patriotism does not prefer one religion over another or a non-religion. In the U.S. Constitution, since we all living in the United States, the word there is no one religion that is named in the Constitution. Although Christian nationalists would like to tell us that there is, religion is referred to in two contexts in terms of the separation of church and state. But no one religion is ever endorsed in the U.S. Constitution. Patriotism can affirm that religious instruction is best left to our houses of worship and other religious institutions and families. Patriotism is love of country. Voting actually is an exercise in patriotism. It should be, not in nationalism, supporting the First Amendment. Patriotism is also not forced. One is not required to love one's country. My colleague Amanda Taylor from the Baptist Joint Committee puts it this way. Patriotism is animated by love. Religious nationalism is animated by hate. To confuse the one for the other is to pretend that hate is love and fear is courage. It is to pretend that hate is love and fear is courage. And with that, final word. This came out from this administration, from President Trump, about 6 months ago. Peter and I were at something called the Religious Freedom Summit, and then we hosted something called the Religious Nationalism Summit, our version of what it means to celebrate religious freedom and human rights, respect across religious traditions. President Trump was there with his motorcade as we were in the convention center locked down. We could not move because the president was coming to town. And he created a new task force, if you're not aware of it. And it is called the Task Force to Eradicate Anti-Christian Bias. Now, it's fascinating that there are many Hindu nationalists that support this. Believe it or not. There are Jewish Zionists and Christian Zionists that support this as well. But let's leave that for others to talk about. I'll talk about it in terms of Christianity. This task force to eradicate Christians' bias says this, and I'm only reading portions of it. By the authority vested in me as president of by the Constitution, the laws of the United States, I say this. This is what he declares. To protect religious freedom of Americans, to end anti-Christian weaponization of government, the founders established a nation in which people were free to practice their faith without fear of discrimination or retaliation by their government. And then he cites the religious freedom legislation, which is still in force but is being challenged today. And he gives examples of where particular Christians have been attacked because of their protesting again at reproductive choice, reproductive justice clinics like Planned Parenthood, or because they had differences of opinion on books that were read that supported full inclusion of all people, including people who are gender diverse. And so he uses this as legitimation to suggest that, well, Christians, from their opinion, are being persecuted. I can disagree or agree with many of the rationale for it. I think what concerns me and should concern you is who is on this task force. On this task force is the Secretary of State. So those relationships we have with India, Israel, Hungary, with other nations where religious nationalism is on the rise, this has bearing. This has bearing because it's the Secretary of State who's on this task force, anti-Christian bias task force, the Secretary of the Treasury, the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of Labor. So when it comes to labor, we're now looking at whether in fact there is anti-Christian bias in terms of labor practices, the Secretary of Education. So policing what books that children are reading, the banning of books that children are reading, the Secretary of Homeland Security, Small Business Administration. So if you're starting a small business and it is perceived as anti-Christian, watch out. Watch out. So what does this say about economic development? The President of Domestic Policy, Federal Emergency Management, FEMA, when there's a disaster somewhere in Alabama, in Illinois, who comes in to care for you with the federal government? Well, we want to make sure that Christians are supported, right? So I'm hoping you get the point. This is now legislation. It is a task force. So hopefully what Peter and I have framed for you will give you places to hang some of the discussion as we look at more specific forms of religious nationalism. And I'll stop there and turn it over to Pushkar.